our and your moderator today. Kasmira, you and your panelists have the floor. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here in person and for those joining us online. So as Isabella touched on there, since the outbreak of the conflict in April 2023, Sudan has been gripped by conflict. Tens of thousands have been killed, more than 12 million people displaced. Reports from witnesses on the ground, from aid groups, from the UN reveal widespread destruction, mass killings, sexual violence, with civilians suffering what no human on this planet should have to endure. Half the population is facing hunger. Behind the two warring sides, foreign actors are also playing their part and amplifying violence, with UN experts reporting of credible allegations that the UAE has been supplying arms and military equipment to the rapid support forces. Investigations by the media, including analysis of satellite data and imagery, have also corroborated this. Though the rapid support forces are by no means the only ones that have committed crimes in this war. In September, a UN fact-finding mission on Sudan found that both sides in this war have committed abuses that may amount to war crimes. But today we're going to focus on the RSF victims, how they were treated, what kind of justice and accountability they can hope for. We're also going to talk about the role of the UAE and how foreign actors sustaining this war can also be held accountable. So without further ado, I'll turn over to our panelists and I'll introduce them very briefly first, and then I'll turn to each one to ask them a question and introduce them further then. But to my far right, we have Matthew Hedges, a British academic who in 2018 was accused of spying for MI6 and tortured in the UAE, later released. And we have Ahmed al-Nuaimi, exiled member of the UAE 94 trial, who's a writer and activist living in the UK, I believe. And then to my immediate right, Yaslam Al-Tayeb, a former hostage held by the Rapid Support Forces, who is a businessman, a UK and Dutch national and Sudanese national. Online, we have Thierry Valle, president of the NGO, the Coordination of Association and Individuals for Freedom of Conscience, and David Donat-Catin, who's an associate adjunct professor of international law at NYU. So quite a big panel here. We've got lots to get through. So let me start with Thierry Valle, who is joining us online and has had to fly back last night, but was here to present a statement at the Human Rights Council General Debate yesterday on behalf of victims of violence committed by RSF. The statement carried a number of specific demands both to RSF and the international community. So I know you have to go, so I'll ask two questions, twofold. So can you tell us about these demands, how civil society can help support victims seeking justice? And also, could you tell us who you're advocating to, who on the international stage can help exert pressure, play a role in bringing an end to this war? So I'll turn over to you now. Thank you.
First, thank you to Geneva Solutions to give me the opportunity to have the floor to your conference. And as you said, I'm currently at the EU Parliament, so I will have to leave you very soon. So to answer your questions, my organization, CAP Freedom of Conscience, has delivered an oral statements on multiple occasions at the United Nations regarding the situation in Sudan, urging international actors to take decisive actions to end the conflict. The UN Human Rights Council provides a vital platform to raise awareness on the ongoing crimes being perpetrated in Sudan. I was therefore pleased to deliver an oral statement yesterday during the general debate at the Human Rights Council on behalf of victims of violence committed by the Rapid Support Forces. On this occasion, the victims called all the member states to exert pressure to uphold fundamental principles of international humanitarian law, including the prohibition of targeting civilians and the protection of essential infrastructures. They also stressed the urgent need for states to provide vital aid to victims and to support countries hosting Sudanese refugees. The victim urged all member states to engage in constructive dialogue and contribute to peace efforts. They emphasized the importance of supporting investigations conducted by the International Criminal Courts. In our oral statement, we also called for an immediate end to the supply of weapons and external support, particularly from the United Arab Emirates. This is especially pressing given that UN experts have found credible allegation that the United Arab Emirates has supplied military equipment. The role of civil society remains essential in exposing crimes committed against civilians, amplifying the voices of victims, and holding perpetrators to account. Human rights organizations, activists, and journalists play a crucial part in documenting atrocities, raising international awareness, and pressing states to take meaningful action. Thank you for your attention.
Moving on then, I'd like to turn to Ahmed al-Nuaimi, I think. No, sorry, apologies for that. We're going to start with Yaslam, apologies. You are British, Dutch, Sudanese national, and you were held, I mean, you're going to tell us about your experience being held hostage, but in particular, I mean, you were freed eventually thanks to your nationalities, to British and Dutch, applying pressure on the Rapid Support Forces. Could you share your experience and also tell us what role and scope you see for other governments in resolving this war, and how can we change the dynamics of this war?
Yeah, first I thank you very much for this opportunity. In regard to the international community role for what's happening in Sudan, first thing is to do their role as international community, treat Sudan like any other country by looking into the atrocity happening in Sudan in a fair way, that actually putting it on the spotlight, more holding the perpetrators responsible. The crimes in Sudan, which is, I have seen it firsthand in front of me, crimes, murders, tortures, I was beaten myself. All these in Sudan is being dealt with different than any other atrocities. In Sudan, you do have the perpetrators, they do have journalists representing them, they have countries representing them, they do get them hosted in parliaments, they do get them spokespeople in the media, while they're committing all these kind of crimes, which is being classified as a form of genocides. And as Marco Rubio described it, is the main genocide happening on Earth right now, is the one happening in Sudan. So for the international community is to hold the rule of law, is to hold every perpetrators, either the one who carried the gun or the one who covered it from the media or the one who supported it financially or politically. They're all share their bit in that crime. So, and that is what they're supposed to do. The basic rule of law, which is supposed to be implemented on every country equally. Because if you watch the international community now, the main focus is in Ukraine and in Gaza, which is underestimating the crisis there, but they're overlooking the crisis in Sudan and the crimes in Sudan, which is, it's not in Sudan, what's happening in Sudan is beyond humanity. Is when you make somebody to choose between their children, which they kill first. There is stories of whole areas being annihilated, people dying out of thirst in a country which is the most country with water supplies, and still the people dying from thirst. People died from hunger, from a country that actually it is being called the food net of the world, and yet nobody is really focusing on what's going on in Sudan. And when they look at it as this war between two parties, which is not. It's annihilation of the people of Sudan. And that is what they're supposed to be called. And that is what we expect from the international community to do. Stand up for that.
Before I turn to other panelists, I mean, what do you think it is about this specific conflict, which is one of the worst we're seeing right now, that makes it, that we're overlooking it? And what hope do you have in, we've seen a change in powers in the world recently with the new US administration, in the UK, Europe as well. I mean, what are your hopes that who will take responsibility and try and lead the charge in trying to address this conflict?
At the end of the last days of Biden administration, there was a promise from the UAE, which is the main financer of this war, not just financial aspect, not just arms, because you have weapons, French weapons, British weapons, Ukrainian weapons, and you have American weapons in Sudan right now, which is, you can't get it. Sudanese government doesn't have it, RSF cannot get it. So it came through the UAE. You have mercenaries came operating in Sudan, like Colombians. Until yesterday, there is a report of around Fasher between 350 to 380 fighter around Fasher. And that is from the Colombian reports, not Sudanese reports. It is Colombian reports. It's talking about these figures. In the last days of the Biden administration, UAE promised to stop supporting RSF and financing RSF. But with the change happened, that Biden left and the administration of Trump took over, we see that is, until yesterday, there is reports that there is some shipments of weapons crossing the border from Chad, Emirati weapons, crossing the border from Chad. So it's still ongoing. The gathering of the RSF representatives in Nairobi lately, there was a leading figure from the Emirati authorities involved in that gathering, assembling it, financing it. So there is no change. And actually, I think is right now, UAE hands a little bit more freer than in the last days of Biden administration. There is some change happening from the UK, for example, that is somewhat moving positively than before. And that is, we're hoping that will put some efforts. But then you have scenes like what happened in the parliament last week that raise also a lot of concerns, even though the British government is promise that is wasn't what it came in the media, but still to give the perpetrators in the crimes in Sudan a platform in the West, this is really concerning. And for people like me, for example, when I see that in front of me, the people who actually captured me and tortured me being hosted in the country I live in, of course that's not acceptable. Now, the expectation that actually there is some measure need to be taken, not just in only focusing on stopping the war or ceasefire and so on. No, but also these people, even the one who is actually sponsoring it in the West, need to be held accountable.
This is a perfect kind of segue to turning over to Ahmed al-Nuaimi. You have had first experience of the justice system in the UAE. You were one of the 94 defendants, mostly government critics, activists, human rights defenders, who were tried in an unfair mass trial in 2013. You were convicted in absentia to 15 years of prison based on vague national security-related charges by the Abu Dhabi Supreme Court. Your brother is still being held, and you're being retried on new charges, terrorism charges. You've written and spoken about these two very different sides of the UAE, the repression it deploys at home against any form of dissent, and its efforts to be seen as a team player on the global stage, as at COP, for example. Could you, in your view, what kind of pressure at an international level can be put on countries like the UAE to hold it accountable for this impunity, for human rights abuses, directly or indirectly, through countries like the Sudan?
Right. Let me start by saying that any observer see what is happening in our region today, see that the UAE play a great part in stopping any democracy movement or any freedom of the people. We have been seeing that since the wave of Arab Spring, and we understand what is the part of what is the part of the UAE is playing today, and what is happening in the in Sudan today is horrible, and no one can understand how the world can be quiet for what is happening. But it is not the first thing that happened from the United Arab Emirates. We can remember that in 2013, when the COP come to Egypt, and how they actually support the dictator there to take over the rights of the people to choose their president, their government. And we saw what they did in Yemen, and we saw what they did even in Libya, everywhere. People, maybe some of them not aware about what is happening inside in the United Arab Emirates, that there are many human violence in the United Arab Emirates. So what did the world has to do? I mean, we don't see that pressure against the United Arab Emirates. Even all the evidence, or everyone who observing, seeing the violence happen in the region. So the first thing that we have to ask the world community and all the countries, all the power countries, where are you from what is happening today? Aren't the people who call for democracy? So you see that this country or this government fighting and commits many human rights violence, even interfacing the countries. Now, what does the United Arab Emirates has to do in Sudan today. What is their part today? We know they support the killers, the rapers. We know that they give them many reports comes and saying what they do from United States, from UK, from the UN. Okay, showing how big their part is doing in this war. So what they have to do, it is very obvious. It is very obvious. I don't think that we need to tell them what to do. They have to give more pressure on the United Arab Emirates government to stop what they do in the region, especially in Sudan today. But we don't see anything like that. Emirates now actually could extend their power everywhere. They could take any port, and they are aiming on that. Everywhere they can do, they have their presence. I mean, they detained the people from any country in the region without being even asked. No one can ask them, how can this country have this power without those big countries and big regimes that they support them? Today, we are calling the world community just to do their part and have a pressure on the United Arab Emirates to take their hands from these countries, especially Sudan today.
I'll come back to you. I want to touch on some things you mentioned afterwards, but just to turn now to Matthew Hedges to kind of follow on from this. You've dedicated much of your research to authoritarian regimes, in particular the consolidation of power and the expansion of the UAE as a security state under its president and Abu Dhabi ruler Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. You yourself have been arrested and tortured and later released. You've given your research and your personal experience. What does the Emirates regime, how it operates at home, reflect on its foreign policy and how it's operating abroad in countries like Sudan?
Thank you very much for the question. The UAE's state security, the secret police, and for a better or worse term, have complete and maximal control over the entire state and society. There is no separation of powers. There is no sphere of influence by which they cannot influence or control. It gets to the point where being able to even limit people's ability to think, to be able, it's not just freedom of expression, say, it's the freedom of thought, of conscience. Now, domestically, this, when you look at, say, the economy, when you look at state authority and engagement, this is entirely as a pyramid. There is no activity that an individual can undertake or conduct independent of the state or the ruling family. This means any business exports, any logistics, any flights, any money transfers or cooperation.
I'm not sure. Sorry to interrupt you. I'm not sure what's the...
Is it?
Any tips for the microphone to stop the...
No? Okay. So basically there is no independence within the state, and what this effectively means is that it denotes state and official attribution for...
Try holding
it. It denotes official and state attribution for any events, for any activities, be it domestically or foreign. And so how are these planes departing from the UAE to Chad, to the Central African Republic, to Uganda, to Sudan itself? Who are funding these operations? Who's fueling these planes? Who is insuring the planes? There's every single component that you can imagine at every stage in terms of the equipment, the logistics, the transfers itself. This runs through the UAE with a paper trail, with an attribution trail that provides the key to finding any form of justice and accountability, because it exists. And this is exactly why the international community may be struggling to be honest with itself about the degree to the UAE's official engagement in this. But I can tell you can engage any of the private sector internationally. There's a huge paranoia and anxiety towards any form of commercial activity and cooperation with components of the Emirati state. And that's predominantly to do with their exposure in Sudan.
So kind of building on that, do you see that is there scope then to apply pressure through the private sector, through the commercial sector?
100%. To give you a comparative example, why it's slightly more difficult, especially in regards to the gold. If you were smuggling oil, you can tell where the oil comes from due to the different chemical attributes of the oil. So you can say, well, actually, this is coming from Iran, this is from sanctions, you've done something bad about this. But with gold, it's much more difficult to find that attribution. But we all know, and you can check how and why do certain companies, Emirati companies, how have they been buying gold from Sudan? How is this processed? How is this extracted? How is it exported? And go over the last few years of export data from Sudan itself. The UAE has bought nearly the entirety of Sudan's gold. Well, if that's the case, then any form of processing that happens in the UAE, that happens in regards to the purchasing of it, there is a degree of culpability in this. With other issues, be it in the logistics field or weapons and everything else associated, well, it's not just that these entities and organizations perform these gun runs, for example, to Sudan, but there is also engagement with Western companies because of its role as a logistics hub. Can those companies and their assets be held, can they come under increased scrutiny? And this is having a serious impact on companies and their activity with the UAE because of the perceived notion from their side that there's a high degree of risk, especially in regards to sanctions. Look at the amount of companies that have been sanctioned by the US regarding members of the RSF that are based in the UAE. And this goes to many other conflicts that are linked to the UAE. And this demonstrates that it is a hub. This is a major way in which the UAE leverages its power and authority and that of these oppressive groups such as the RSF.
In the last days and weeks, we've seen the rapid support forces lose some control over Khartoum and the Sudanese armed forces move in. And there's some theories around that the sanctions imposed by the US are the sanctions are taking effect and perhaps stifling that supply of weapons from the UAE theory. But could we go further with sanctions and embargoes on the parties involved in this war and indirect parties as well? What could we do further in terms of sanctions to help curtail this war?
should be the enforcement of embargoes and sanctions. It's not so much that there's ample scope and room to expand these punishments, to be able to demand the behavioral change. That's exactly what these punishments are designed to do. But without the effective enforcement of this, by actually holding entities to account, by having these public accountable sessions, instead of trying to hide, trying to prevent these discussions taking place at an international, at a multilateral level, well, there should be public and open accountability for this. That's the only way in which you can really drive that behavioral change.
Speaking about that open public accountability, one of the main avenues for this is our courts of law. And so with that, I'll turn to David Donat-Catton, who's joining us online. I believe he should come up on the screen in a second. David, you're an associate adjunct professor in international law. You have extensive experience in this area of international criminal law. Could you speak about the kind of what kind of legal accountability? Like, I've asked this question repeatedly, but I'd like to ask it to you as well. There is for holding actors responsible for crimes. Where do the investigations at the ICC stand? And the evidence that's compiled by the fact-finding mission at the UN and other NGOs, where is it going in terms of the judiciary bodies? How can we build cases against parties involved?
Thank you very much, Kasmira. And I think the answer is quite straightforward in respect of the situation in Darfur, which is a sub-region, very large one of the Sudan. So we have to understand that the International Criminal Court has jurisdiction, but only regarding the crimes allegedly committed in the sub-regions of the wide Darfur. So not the entire Sudan conflict. So that's already a limitation. But the good news is that under that territorial jurisdiction, the International Criminal Court can not only look into the responsibility of the direct perpetrators, the prime authors of alleged atrocity crimes against humanity, war crimes, or even genocide, but also those who are aiding and abetting such crimes, including foreign nationals, leading state authorities of countries like the UAE, that are connected with the crimes by way of financing, disbursing resources, profiting from the looting of minerals, like mention has been made to the gold market. So in other words, there are a number of ways and means to link the responsibility of those aiding and abetting or complices to the prime perpetrators. And no doubt the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, has been proceeding with investigations based on Resolution 1593 of 2005. And even though that might have created in the past a lot of frustration because of lack of enforcement and very limited cooperation, I would like to say that that avenue must continue to be explored, analyzed, and pushed through, because that also triggers the operation of the principle of complementarity, under which only states that are willing and able to end impunity can prevent cases before the court. So, in other words, even if the UAE is not a party to the Rome Statute, if their individuals are collaborating in the perpetration of crimes, for example, let me make by way of example the major story that was run by the New York Times at the end of September last year, which was taken up by the US State Department in its determination, was also somehow anticipated by a pivotal report from the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights last year. Many other authorities spoke about this. Essentially, what the UAE created is a fake humanitarian hub at the border with the Chad, investing more than $1.5 billion, which is very close to the GDP of the entire Chad. And through that fake enormous hospital or humanitarian hub, essentially channeling weapons, vehicles, ammunitions, financial and other means, through which even under the law of state responsibility, one can discuss the possibility of invoking the application of Article 8 of the principle of state responsibility, the draft articles of the International Law Commission, identifying the UAE as an entity directing or controlling the RSF. The RSF is not anymore part of the state of Sudan, is a rebel organization, is a rebel movement, an insurrectional movement, if you wish, under international law. And therefore, if their behaviors are controlled by another state entity, it's that state entity that may be held accountable for the internationally wrongful acts perpetrated within the territory of Sudan by that rebel organization. So the war started as a sui generis war on the 15th of April 2023. This created a lot of confusion because, we lawyers are used to confront ourselves with wars between rebels and government, or among different rebel movements, ideological movements, movement for national liberation, decolonization movements, and so on and so forth. Here we had essentially two elements of the same government splitting one from another, so a war between the army and the special forces. But now these special forces have really become identifiable as a rebel group. And therefore, I believe there is enough authority to go even behind the third states that are not only fueling the war, but also controlling de facto the behavior of these bad actor on the ground. That, again, as a caveat, if you allow me, as you said at the very beginning, that doesn't provide any exonerating element or attenuating factor for the responsibility of the Sudanese armed forces, and so the central government, which is also implicated in the commission of mass atrocity crimes like war crimes and crimes against humanity. So I think if the intent of the international community nowadays is to intervene in ongoing armed conflicts and bring about either ceasefire agreements or hopefully also peace deals, well, that the one in Sudan probably it's not the most difficult to be resolved, because once we stop the foreign interferences, I would argue we have good chances to resolve the conflict, which is driven by a lot of external factors. And let me bring in another element of accountability here. If we remember, in West Africa, a lot of the reasoning, a lot of the motivation behind the war in Sierra Leone and in other sub-regions, there was the control over the so-called blood diamonds. And against that very profitable area of international trade, a special sanction regime was created by the UN with disclosure obligations and so on. I think the same should be done with the Sudanese blood gold, which is exported through the UAE. And these can maybe hopefully create another mechanism to make the cost of war, the continuation of the war, higher and higher, and help the people of Sudan to liberate themselves from these bad actors that are victimizing mainly the civilian populations.
But I would follow up on what you said. If there's appetite, because there needs to be, then you're saying that there's enough evidence there to try international actors, but then there needs to be the will of other countries to do so, and perhaps there's too many commercial interests or other political interests at stake to do so. And what do you think? Do you think there's appetite there and willpower from?
I think there is I think the question is very legitimate. There is very limited appetite. I totally agree with you. We are living one of the most critical and difficult moment in the history of international law and international relations. At the same time, there is a willingness to intervene, to end ongoing armed conflicts. It's happening vis-a-vis the Middle East. It's happening in respect of the war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine. So I think something should be done also in Sudan, because the number of victims is maybe higher or at least comparable to the ones that I referred to in relation to these other two crises, to other conflicts. And at the end of the day, one has also to question how far the sanctions regimes that have been deployed have worked. There are two types of sanctions: the real international sanctions imposed under Chapter 7, United Nations Security Council, where I can only find 5 Sudanese at the moment being in a sanction list, notwithstanding the body of resolutions. And it seems only 2 members of the RSF, high-level militaries, but not the head, who is instead under the other type of sanction regime, the unilateral ones by the United States, General Dagalo. And I think a first review should be done within the UN. How effective are the existing sanctions and how can we expand them? Of course, the appetite is limited. But once we make a little bit of progress, for example, on the Russian-Ukraine situation, probably Russia would be less amenable to veto any action in relation to Sudan. Similarly, I don't see any Chinese veto protecting the RSF. The problem is, of course, business as usual with the UAE. I mean, the entire world is using Dubai as the financial, entertainment, global travel hub that we know of, Fly Emirates. So we need the big challenge for this group of very important activists, and I'm very honored to be part of it today, is to change the narrative about the UAE. That is not, this dream destination for business, this, country where everybody should be keen in making business with, unless they change course of conduct and they become good actors, stopping to interfere in the domestic affairs of the Sudan, making transparency and accountability part of their equation. So I know it's going to take some time, but the law is in our side, and maybe there are some geostrategic developments that could help us.
Thank you for ending this part of the panel with some optimism there. I'd like to take the moment now for the last 15 minutes to turn over to the room and online for questions. So if anyone in the room has a question to ask our panelists, we'll start here. Questions?
I'm going to just maybe contradict what David said. Instead of, he suggested trying to elevate sanctions or to try and elevate the negative understanding of the UAE and Dubai as against its well nurtured and cultivated image. I would suggest that you should absolutely spend the majority of your effort and focus on the commercial entities associated to and connected to the Abu Dhabi ruling family. This is what would make the change. They don't care as much about the branding. Of course they care about the branding of other Emirates. But if you go after the personal interests of the Abu Dhabi ruling family, this is where there's significant sensitivity. This is what you should go after. It's without anything else, it's all to do with them, and that's something which they can't shake off as much. They can always go and create a new company, right? Then the company has a different brand, it has a different image to sell. But if you put the focus on individuals, say, just as Tahnoun bin Zayed or Mansour bin Zayed, there is significant business interests that have generated negative and further ramifications. That's something which you can't shake off.
Perhaps it could be both. I mean, you could both. I mean, one doesn't discount the other. So two effective, concrete ways that we could.
I would say the most effective is going after the personal assets.
Very interesting. Thank you for that. And sorry, Isabelle, your phones. Yes, before we turn back to questions again, I should have given you all a chance to kind of rebound on some of the comments that have been made over the last hour. Yaslam, if you'd like to.
Yeah, there is one very important point that actually for the last 2 years, most of the discussion since the war started is the discussion about the war between two sides and putting the two sides as an equivalent, as an equal sides. And that is not the case. And that is what made the suffering go so long and the war in Sudan overlooked because they see it as war between two sides. And that's not true. That's not what's happening in Sudan. The government side is a legitimate government, is there to defend their people, the people on the ground. So the army have to defend the ground, the people in the ground. And if you watch what's happening of the movement of the people, you have the figures between 8 million to 12 million displaced people. These 8 to 12 million displaced people, the majority of them, the one who displaced internally, where they go? They go to the army side, seeking refuge and seeking protection. Where the crisis is happening is where the RSF is. So by having it as equal perpetrators, that's actually part of the crime committed against the Sudanese people. Because here the people making the war as it is a battle for government, to take the government. It's not. It is a war, a proxy war, happened in Sudan, perpetrated by a foreign force, used the RSF. And that's what happened in Sudan. And that's what made it so worse. No, yes, RSF, the majority of them, they are Sudanese people, but still, there's mercenaries, they have the fighters from Chad, fighters from Niger, fighters from Mali, fighters from Yemen, fighters from Syrian people who used to live in Sudan. They joined with RSF. Like this, it is not as what is being put in the media. And that is part of the problem itself. That is the defining what is the war is.
I think what you're touching upon is also it's very difficult, or like you say, it's not in the media, it's very difficult to report on, to prove. There's very little, well, at least evidence that you can, as journalists, media or NGO, it's very difficult to gather evidence to report on. And this goes to one question that someone's asking online, is that the UAE has responded, and it's important actually to say this in this panel, that they have denied and refuted all claims of sending any weapons to the RSF. And so how can we monitor and what is happening to better stop the flow? Because here we've just talking about the UAE, but there are other actors involved as well, and not enough evidence out there to prove this. David, yes, question for you, I think.
Yes, one thing that can be done immediately, and I don't exclude that something in this direction might have already been happening, is that Chad is a state party to the Rome Statute of the ICC and is obligated to cooperate with the court. So if the UAE is using, as it has been alleged, the territory in Chad, on the Chad side of the border with Sudan, to put up any logistical operation, fueling and creating a hub for the RSF to go in and out with any type of weaponry, equipment, money, and so on and so forth, and having also things smuggled out illegally like gold and so on. If this is happening in the soil, in the territory of Chad, the prosecutor, the Office of the Prosecutor of the ICC can send his own investigators there, and through the cooperation that he must obtain from the government of Chad, verify that this is what is happening. And this will create a validation of the theory that our colleague just mentioned of the proxy war. And this former Janjaweed militia, now called Janjaweed Coalition or Alliance, transform itself into the RSF, is essentially a proxy of a foreign government, and therefore the leaders of that government can be indicted for complicity, for aiding and abetting the perpetration of war crimes and crimes against humanity against the civilian population of the Sudan. So even in the absence of access to the territory of the Sudan, so much can be done on the territory, for example, of Chad. My call for changing the narrative is more like sort of debunking the mythology that going on vacation in Dubai for each of us in the global north is a great opportunity, a wonderful place. We need the public opinion to learn about what's going on in Sudan and be illuminated by the media professionals and those in the NGO side and other fact-finding bodies that should elevate the knowledge of what's going on. That was my main thing. If I can only say something on sanctioning economic financial interests of those allegedly most responsible. In an ideal world, that's of course is a very important strategy. We have seen that, however, it has not really worked well. That's why I was calling for some sort of revision of what is available there under the targeted sanctions at the UN level, but also a review of what has been made available at unilateral level by UK, US, Canada, European Union, because when you touch upon the interest of oligarchs, of individuals who have enormous capacities to create convoluted financial schemes, probably that's, focusing on that may not lead to immediate results. But yes, one thing does not exclude the other, and financial interests also should be at the focus of targeted measures.
Maybe Ahmed or Matthew, you'd like to, just to finish on that question, because I saw you were nodding on this burden of proof. You mentioned this pyramid of control and a paper trail. So we should be able to follow. We should be able to find proof through the financial system.
So, understandably, if the UAE itself has said that they reject the accusations of their involvement in this, but as this is not, say, a case of law where a court reads and discusses and reviews the evidence, but there still needs to be a forum by which, if there can't be an effective mechanism that the international arena isn't willing to undertake, then publicize the information. Let the court of public opinion review and decide whether there is any merit, whether there is any association to these allegations of weapon delivery. Why and how do these planes allegedly leave the UAE? How are these planes fueled? Who flies them? If it's the same airports, if it's the same organizations that, say, other airline carriers, or if it's owned by Abu Dhabi Airports, or if it's some other state entity, well, if they are facilitating it in any degree or any array, even though there is no definitive judgment on it, foreign partners will be forced to review and consider their risk from association. They will be forced to decide themselves whether they take action against this. And that's why I said earlier that, because ultimately those planes couldn't take off unless there was approval from the president and other members of that elite decision-making circle. The attribution is there by design from the state. It's then piecing the rest of those puzzles together. And, you know, if you put it in the public domain, people can decide what the case is and if there's an effective defense. Just denying it isn't going to cut it, really.
We had one question in the room from the gentleman at the back.
Hello. I'd like to thank the panelists and the organization as well. I just want to make some comments that I'm here to hear about the situation in Sudan, the war crime and the mass human rights situation in Sudan, which is I'm here for 1 hour hearing a lot about UAE and a lot of things, but nothing about the situation, the human rights situation in Sudan, which is, I think, we should focus on it. The High Commissioner and the United Nations has made it very, very clear on the 12th of January what's happened in Wad Madani in 12th of January 2025 is a war crime, and they said as it is that it's responsible of the army forces in Sudan and the military group or the Islamic military group. And videos is voted very, very clear that people is killing in the road, shooting, cutting heads. And this type of mass violence, this is what we should focus. Let me make it very clear. There is two types of regime, which is success regime and failed regime. In Sudan, it's not about 2 years, it's about 30, 40, 50 years. And this is the situation. In the last human rights session, 57, the representative has been mentioned in the council a lot of countries, maybe 8 or 7 or 9 countries. He mentioned that they have bad rules in the in the situation of Sudan. And instead of focusing in the rule of different countries, that he mentioned, Russian and USA and British and Egypt and UAE as well, and a lot. And instead of that, let's focus in their situation. They lost half of Sudan 20 years before, or more than that, and South Sudan has been created because of the failure of Sudan's regime. I'm not mean these regimes. I mean for all over these 50 years. The Sudanese need a civil government, civil democratic government, which brings peace and development to these people who is suffering for 50 years. Nothing about aiming other country or aiming other parties. It's about their self. What's Sudan is facing now is no one happy with it, and it's a time to stand and to be focused on their responsibility. They are facing a real failure, a real government failure. And instead of continue in this war, no, let's go to negotiation, which Saudi Arabia has been started, which is happening in Geneva. And so many countries, they are welcome this investigation or this discussion. I think this is what we hope for Sudan, and this is what they want. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your comments, and I'll let Yaslam rebound on that.
Actually, it's really, for me, it's a moving comment from the honorable guest. As a victim of this war, I've been suffering from what happened in Sudan. I'm a civilian, and I'm a Democrat person, seeking democracy for my country, seeking civilian government for my country, and a rule of law. Institutes, which is Sudan is well known of, yes, is misused in the past, but still it did exist. The war in Sudan and the crisis or calamity happened in Sudan is actually done under the umbrella of the civilian governments, bringing a civilian government, bringing democracy. The killers killing in Sudan, and they say, we're killing, bringing for you democracy. That flag is being carried around in a false claim. Right now, we don't need civilian government. We need the killers to put on stop, the killing to stop. We need to hold whoever committed this crime accountable for the crimes they committed. Then let the Sudanese people decide what they want. They want the army to rule, that is their choice. They want democracy, that's their choice. They want a king, that is their choice. Right now, we have over 12 million people displaced. We have people, we have bodies from my immediate family. My two uncles, they died, they've been buried by the door. Because when they died, there was no way to take them to the graveyard. My grandmother died in our house, was buried with one person. We didn't even, until today, nobody is can go and reach her. She's buried in front of the house. And cases like this in thousands. It's not in tens or 20s or hundreds, in thousands. So the honorable guest is mentioning about the civil government, and so this is not the case for now. And this is, it touched me because under that claim, the war started. It didn't start just because of, it started because of that same cause, which is, yeah, Sudanese people want that. They want civilian government, they want democratic regime. But now if you ask any Sudanese person, he will say to you, no, just hold on, stop the war first. Hold the people who committed it accountable. Get us the base of the basic needs of our life back. No. What I'm saying, the war started in Sudan under the pretext of bringing civilian government, bringing democracy, under that. Until last week, when they're talking about it, they talk about bringing democracy. I don't know how you bring democracy by killing people.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry to cut you, but I think this is a discussion that we could continue forever and after this, and there's certainly going to be a lot more questions to talk about. But maybe we could close with Ahmed. I'll leave you the final word to you, and then we'll.
I will start with the guest what he said about that. Actually, if the action of the United Arab Emirates government is a new thing that we haven't seen before, it is we can try to find an excuse for that. Okay, but we can see the action of the United Arab Emirates from 2012 until today. It's the same, supporting the violence, supporting the dictators, actually against any democracy in the region. So we can't find now excuse for all those people who were killed in Egypt, in Yemen, in Libya, in Sudan. And this is actually, when we do that, we are supporting this violence to have the excuse. And we understand that the United Arab Emirates government is trying to stop any investigation that can happen. Now, you can see the government of Sudan. I remember that maybe 6 months ago, they provide the evidence for the UN, showing them the passport of the UAE people who were in Sudan and who actually controlled many places in Sudan. What did the UN did? What has happened since that time? Nothing at all. They are supported to do whatever they do. Nowadays, actually, as my friend said, the investigation has to happen in the United Arab Emirates, and everywhere now we see that the violence happen, like in Sudan, has to push and to see the investigation happen. Not well. We remember when we had problem with Iraq, the investigation happened every day. We see that the group go and the group come, and they say the weapon is like that, and they explain the weapons. So why is that not happen here today? Because there are support from the many big countries today, and we have to stop that, and we have to be serious. Even in the UN has to be serious with this action, and to take to take some action actually against what's happened in Sudan and what happened even in the United Arab Emirates. I'm not talking about something that's in the past. Yesterday, they actually extend for our people in the United Arab Emirates, and they when we appeal for putting the people who called for democracy, they are having in the United Arab Emirates a live present just yesterday. And we heard how many weapons come to Sudan yesterday as well. We have heard that. So what is happening? It's nothing, unfortunately.
Yes, thank you very much to all the panelists for their comments today. This left us with a lot of food for thought. And I'd like to thank as well David Catton, who's on Catton Online. Thierry Valle has left us, and so thanks to all of you, and I'm wishing you a good afternoon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.